Oh, there's something wrong here. Or my name is Jose Santos de Guatemala. And it's not.
Just because Halloween is over doesn't mean the spooky times can't continue. Courage the Cowardly Dog premiered in 1999 on November 4th. Created and directed by John R. Doworth, this show blends comedy and horror in a mastery that I have never seen before. It provided a springboard that spiritual successors such as Gravity Falls, Amphibia, and The Owl House could emulate. This November, all month long, I'm going to go over every episode of the show, or at least as much as I can. This is my favorite animated series to date. Let's review Courage the Cowardly Dog. The Shadow of Courage is yet another classic. Written by Dilworth and Bauer once again, this episode is equal parts lighthearted and scary. When an old rich man dies, his shadow haunts nowhere. Eventually, it makes its way to the Bag House, causing chaos in its wake. When the Bag family is pitted against each other, it's up to Courage to stop the shadow. After Eustace and Muriel both go missing, Courage consults a computer for help.
You mean evil shadows?
I don't know.
Deciding to talk to the Shadow himself, Courage braves the basement to confront the Shadow.
Okay, Shadow, where's Muriel?
The Shadow reveals he wants to be a star, but Courage convinces him being the shadow of a star is better than scaring people. An important lesson out of many for the series. And with one last frightening scare, we end the episode.
Now that's what I call scary. Know what I mean?
I enjoyed the balance of comedy and horror a lot in this episode. The biggest scares come in the form of the old man passing away and the Shadow pretending to be Muriel for a brief scene. I'm incredibly surprised that they went this dark with the show this early. The Shadow, voiced by Dennis Pretovic, is a character that animation can only bring to life.
You're driving me crazy!
The way he contorts and shifts is amazing and looks beautiful in this art style. Even though what he shifts into is pretty simple sometimes, the simplicity is sometimes the scariest. I also love the random New York accent he has, but seeing as Stretch Films and Courage the Cowardly Dog is done in New York, I'm not surprised at all. And while this episode isn't really a reference to anything in particular, the Shadow is definitely a reference to Mr. Peanut. The rich man, voiced by Peter Fernandez, is an interesting character. I like how he's slightly green, as if greed turns him into the color of money. I'm very surprised that Eustace isn't green by now. The rich man does get his comeuppance in the worst way possible, so that's good, I guess. His butler Jennings, voiced by Simon Preble, also voices one of my favorite characters in the series. While Jennings was somewhat right not to help the rich old man during his coughing attack, I can totally see where he's coming from.
Everything is for sale, Jennings. Even people.
Yes, even people.
The computer, voiced by Simon Preble, is one of my favorite characters in the series. He usually has the same shtick every episode, calling Courage a twit, mocking him otherwise. It truly all depends on if the writers want Courage to solve the problem himself or not. I also appreciate the dig at really slow internet times, seeing as Courage had time to meditate while he was searching. Also, while I'm not sure how prevalent emojis were back in the 90s, there is a smiley face emoji in his last line.
You twit.
As for our heroes, this is my favorite dynamic of the trio. All three of them not only against each other, but against a villain. Courage trying to solve the problem while Eustace is berating Courage, and Muriel saving Courage from Eustace. It's kind of like rock, paper, scissors in a way.
Now you sleep in the attic.
While she isn't defeating the main villain of the episode this time, she is great at warding off her husband. I also love that Muriel and Eustace treat Courage like their child, although each side talks to each other and neither one listens, so that's pretty interesting.
Wait, you stay here. I'll go.
Courage is really great in this episode. He has a lot of classic lines.
I'm telling you, there's someone here. Or my name's Shirley. And it's not.
As well as a lot of funny bits to make the comedy flow. He really helps ease the tension in the episode. I also liked how Courage transformed into a variety of monsters this episode. Unlike previous episodes, this one had a closer tie-in to the monster.
Oh! Hey, I better stop that. I can begin to like it.
Muriel plays the role of Courage's protector and is really great with that rolling pin. That one-woman wail song that accompanies her means trouble is afoot. I also like how calm and level-headed she is in this episode, even though it's mostly obliviousness. While I'm not sure of Eustace's belief in the supernatural or not, he really does play with the Shadow in this episode. I'm not sure if he really thinks the Shadow is Courage or not, but it's still pretty funny. Seeing him strangle Courage makes me think back on the debate of whether Homer should strangle Bart on The Simpsons, but I don't really mind it that much here, since Eustace usually gets his comeuppance.
Ow!
I also like how Eustace and Muriel are pushed to the side at the end of the episode to focus more on the Shadow and Courage. And while not a character in this episode, but a future episode, Basil the Burglar shows up for a few brief scenes. And now we finally get to talk about the Bag Farmhouse. The Bag Farmhouse is entirely made of wood, but only shown from a very far away angle lit by the moon. There is a constantly spinning windmill next to it, and that's very important for the end of the series. I also gotta say that ground is really barren, and that's another thing for season 2 we'll get back to. The first room we see within is Eustace and Muriel's bedroom. It's basically a bed with 2 nightstands and 2 lamps with a window on the side. This room changes the least, I believe, throughout the series. Other rooms within the house are completely changed from the rest of the series. A lot of rooms are basically empty spaces for the characters to walk around in, with very few furniture pieces around. The exception to this is the front room or sitting room, which has a lot of chairs and couches that don't really match up with the rest of the show.
Eustace, must you really sleep in the attic? It's so cold.
He seemed happy to me.
The attic hasn't changed that much either, just a barren room with a computer on a table in the corner. And while the basement is a focal point of the episode, we barely see any of it except for the stairs.
Things I do for love.
And throughout the house there are various hallways, restrooms, and windows that I don't even know where they are within the house's geometry. The Bag Farmhouse does change structure every episode, and different furniture pieces and rooms are changed. For the bulk of the series, however, the bottom floor stays pretty static, while the top floor of the house, I really don't know. The town of Nowhere is brought once again into the episode. We see a few buildings, an ice cream shop, an observatory where the rich man lives, as well as a few houses dotting the city street. Moving on, though, the art direction of the episode is excellent as always. The episode plays with darkness a lot, as well as shadows. The moonlight is very useful for this episode and really wonderful. The shadow looks amazing in all its different forms, and I love how it's not only used for horror, but for comedy. The music is once again in top form with this episode. Jody Gray has done a great job to make all the songs memorable. Case in point, a lot of themes I thought came from future episodes started here. The fiddle theme when Muriel is chasing Eustace chasing Courage is a delight.
Where is that lousy dog?
We also get Courage's plan theme briefly when he's typing on the computer.
Come on, come on!
The Bag Farmhouse even has its own song done on accordion. The Shadow even has his own scary theme song just for him, I believe. As well as a theme song for when he turns good.
Not bad.
The Shadow of Courage is an underrated classic. Having not watched this episode in a while, I'm pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it. Everything is basically in top form this episode, and the animation, music, and voice acting are all top notch. The gags are very funny, the scares are really scary and otherwise dark. As we delve further into this show, I love how we get more of Nowhere, but also more side characters, especially the recurring ones. I also appreciate the moral takeaway of this episode, and we'll see way more of that from episodes to come.
I don't know how to make it in showbiz, but up there are the real stars. Why don't we hang with them?
I thought this episode was great, and I'd rate it awesome. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching so far. Make sure to click like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. You can also click the bell icon for more creativity. Now let's get back to it. Dr. Quack Amnesia Specialist introduces another recurring nemesis for Courage. Written only by Irvin S. Bauer, this episode is a merry-go-round. When Muriel contracts amnesia, Courage contacts a doctor named Quack. Unfortunately for Muriel and Courage, Quack is a con artist who quickly subdues Eustace. Threatening Courage with a mallet and Muriel with several different torture means, he tries to extract the location of their valuables.
Ooh la la. Then we'll get you to remember.
Courage eventually contacts the police and they arrive arresting Quack. At the end, Courage and Muriel are safe without amnesia. Eustace is stuck in the closet with amnesia, and Quack, well, we'll see him again sooner or later.
Wait, you have not seen the last of Le Quack. Ouch! Dirty dog.
While this episode does introduce an important character for Courage to face against, I don't think it's his best episode. Unlike the previous pairing of episodes, this episode isn't really scary or funny, it's just boring and kind of weird. We're treated to the same types of jokes, the same types of runarounds, and the same types of weird things Quack does to Muriel every cycle. With the amount of things happening in this episode, it makes me think I have amnesia, or more accurately, deja vu. This episode provides the introduction introduction of Dr. LeQuack, and while I think he's a good character, he's not really that great in this episode. He isn't really that much of a threat without his mallet, and he doesn't really use it all that much in the episode except on Eustace and Muriel.
Mwah.
Paul Scheffler provides his voice once again, and while this is a decent French accent, it isn't really that evil or threatening in comparison to Cats or even the Fox. I do love his design, however. The blue feet, the blue hair, the blue tie, the red stripe on his neck, the orange bill, and the eyes that are really off-center to his head are super interesting. You can see this style ripped straight from the Chicken from Outer Space, just made into a duck. It's kind of weird. I also love how comically large his card is and comically large his mallet is, as opposed to how comically small his doctor's bag is.
That little doggy is quite a Houdini.
As for other side characters, the computer returns once again, and I'm not sure if it's the computer or the police saying all these snarky things. Either way, it's good to have the computer back, especially since he basically saves the episode from being too boring. We also get a really great reaction face from Courage. We also see the police chief and 2 other officers in this episode, and while they only show up at the end of this episode, they are present in many other episodes and in many other jobs. Another reoccurring character and one of my personal favorites is Mr. Mouse, voiced by Tom McKeon. He shows up briefly to help Courage punch LeQuack in the face, something that should have been done from the outset. He shows up from time to time and even has a great catchphrase.
No prob.
Courage isn't really all that great this episode.
What have I done?
Not only does he summon the villain, he doesn't even really defeat the villain himself. He just stalls LeQuack until the police arrive. The constant stalemate of Courage and LeQuack not getting anywhere gets pretty old, though. In a way, LeQuack and Courage are similar in this episode, as they both have several different failures with the same outcome. I do appreciate Courage's interactions with the computer, Mr. Mouse, and Muriel, so that's a good thing, I guess. Muriel herself is kind of a blank slate this episode on purpose, but we do get to see her sitar playing, which is one of my favorite parts of the series. It's such a strange random detail about the character that she can play this weird instrument, and I just love it. It also shows that despite her amnesia, she still can play the same song she always has. And during the episode, it is alternatingly funny and sad that she has amnesia. As someone who used to have a relative with a similar mental degradation, especially with the same cauliflower hair, it kind of hits in that funny yet sad way. Very bittersweet. In the beginning of this episode, Eustace, I believe, is at his worst here. The phrase he uses when talking to Muriel initially after she has amnesia is really dated for the 90s at least.
Slave woman.
I do like, however, that it immediately puts us off his side and makes his comeuppance all the sweeter. I do find his line immediately afterwards to be evocative of husbands in the 50s and 60s.
Your job is cleaning, cooking, shopping, laundry, and anything else I can think of.
It is in this episode that we at last get the finalized Bag farmhouse. Starting from the exterior, the entire house is made for wood except for the 6 windows as well as the front door that's all painted green. The windmill is also positioned at the back of the house this time instead of way off to the side. At the back of the house, there's also an exit door from the kitchen as well as a cellar door. We'll be covering that cellar door later on in the series.
Here, drink some tea.
We get an excellent shot of the Bag living room at the beginning of the episode. We have Muriel's rocking chair, Eustace's chair, as well as a small end table with a cup of tea and a photo of Muriel and Eustace at their wedding. Behind that is the stairs, a picture frame, and an old grandfather clock. Next to Eustace's chair is a tall double bulb lamp with a lampshade. Across the room there is a picture frame, but in other episodes there's also a fireplace. And finally, behind Muriel's rocking chair is usually a door under the stairs, but for some reason it's not in this shot. Like I've said before, the Bag house fluctuates a lot between episodes, so just bear with me as I try to piece it together. Next to the living room is a dining room with a large table with chairs, as well as a furnace behind that. There are also several picture frames adorning the walls. On the other side of the room there is a large dresser with several drawers in it, as well as a cabinet. Next to the dresser is also a telephone on the table. And while not really shown in this episode, there is probably a basement door within this room. Beyond the dining room, which is rarely seen in the show, the kitchen is a main focal point of the series. Several cabinets adorn the walls up top, while more drawers adorn the walls down below. Pots and pans are hung next to the window, and below that is the sink, as well as counter space for appliances like a toaster and some bread. There is also a stove in the corner and a refrigerator on the opposite side. Courage's dog bowl rests below a clock on the wall near the door. The door is painted yellow, which is pretty interesting because the entire room is basically green, like the front front door. On the ceiling of the kitchen is a single light, and throughout the house there are several wooden floorboards that may cause splinters. The computer room in the attic is also the same as the previous episode. One of the weirdest things about this episode, however, is how the living room changes midway through. In addition to the closet just existing out of nowhere, a large couch exists out of nowhere as well, replacing all the furniture in the room. As much as this inconsistency doesn't really mess with the flow of the episode, it's still weird to see in general. However, the show does have a rubber band-like continuity where things that are destroyed one episode are rebuilt the next, so just whatever. And while I'm on the subject of the house, every single line in the house is curved or bent in a really strange fisheye lens type structure. It really adds to the weird style of the series. For how briefly we see it, Dr. LeQuack's lair is chock full of items that are of interest. From left to right, we have several different goblets from unknown origin, gold bars, we have a safe full of jewels and money bags strewn everywhere, cash pads everywhere, works of art, the SS Dill and the now called Dilly painting being references to creator John R. Dilworth and his cartoon Noodles and Ned. Complete with a large anchor, we also have a rack of clothing for disguises, an apple on the desk, as well as a computer and a large lamp. There's also some haphazardly drawn blinds in the corner, and the large diamond that Dr. LeQuack is holding. We also see the trebuchet, catapult, whatever, return in season 2, so that's pretty cool. The art direction is really great in this episode as far as backgrounds and animation. There isn't really anything to write home about here, but I do appreciate the fleshing out of the Bag farmhouse. The music is very nice too. LeQuack gets his own recognizable theme, as well as several different themes from the sitar in this episode. I like how they eventually combine during the train scene. It's pretty cool to hear. Courage's plan theme is also expanded here and given way more notes and bravado. The police even get their own little theme, and I'm wondering if there's something between the Scots and the French I don't really know about.
Oh, we've been looking for you.
And while last episode's theme was spelled out to the audience, this episode's lesson is not. A common theme with Muriel, as we'll see going on, is her over-trustworthiness. And while here she has amnesia, it still rings true that you should not take advantage of your elders. I've heard many stories and experiences of people who have gone through scams even worse than what LeQuack is doing here. And while this episode was boring, it does provide a cautionary tale to the audience.
I go in, steal all their valuables, and they won't remember.
Dr. LeQuack, Amnesia Specialist, while having a recurring villain for Courage, also has a recurring plot point line. So many pieces of it are recycled ad nauseum, and it makes me feel like I have amnesia. The art direction is really nice here, as well as the music. They are the two great takeaways in this episode. I also find that, to quote Linkin Park, in the end, it doesn't even matter. There was nothing really lost or gained here. The episode basically resets the status quo aside from Eustace's memory. The side characters really stole the show here for me. Seeing Mr. Mouse, the computer, and the police chief are all great. And just like Eustace at the end, this episode is quite forgettable.
You poor thing. What do you want from us?
This episode had a lot of problems. I'd rate it okay. Overall, this was a decent continuation to the series. We got a very great episode expanding the boundaries of nowhere, and then we got a bottle episode that was actually quite boring. The Shadow of Courage I would recommend in a heartbeat, but I would only recommend Dr. LeQuack, Amnesia Specialist if you want to see the origins of the character. So that was 2 episodes of Courage a Cowardly Dog. Let me know which episode was your favorite in the comments. I'll see you next time with another pair of episodes. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching Jesse Hecht Creative. Feel free to click like, subscribe, share, or leave a comment. You can also visit us at jessehechtcreative.com, where you'll find more reviews like this one. Thanks again for watching and keep being creative. Stay tuned.